a revised sense of ontology, not just the thing beyond perspective. Okay. Now let's look at the definition of the human. How's that? All right, definition is the critic's equivalent of the lyric, or of an aria, an opera. I like that. In actual development, definition may be the last thing a writer hits upon, or may be formulated somewhere along the line, but logically it's prior to the observations that are summarized. This will be a recurring motif in analytic philosophy. The importance of logical versus temporal priority. So the idea here is that a definition temporally comes after the thing it defines, but logically it is prior to it. And my question is always, why? I mean, why? Right, and so what's missing from this is, and this is 1945, so it's right at the same time, is existentialism. So the basic claim of existentialism is existence precedes essence, right? That's the bumper sticker slogan, whatever that means. And it's being developed at exactly this time. Existence preceding essence means exactly the opposite of what you just said. Which is that you don't have to logically have the essence before you get its existence. You don't have to logically have the idea before you get its expression. Logically, right? So implicit, but that's, no, I think that you're exactly right in terms of this thinking. But for me, what that does is it indicates the extent to which logical priority is an axiological priority, meaning it's an implication of a particular value structure, right? It's that logical priority is not simply a question of logic. So, and you'll see this recur, like it's logically prior, you have to have the idea before you can have its expression. And and he recognizes temporally that's not how things work, right? Temporally, you write about something and the definition comes much later, you know? But logically, that definition, the thing's being, must precede its going out into the world. And I'm saying, like, that's a particular philosophical commitment that has certainly been problematized in the last 50 or 60 years, such that there's a difference between those two things, but it's not simply logically prior. And to say that it is logically prior implies a certain understanding of logic. In fact, one of the arguments against induction is precisely its deceptive quality. Like I'll give you an example of this. Sorry, that's what it is. That is my example. That's it. Right? So the argument against induction, or the problem with induction, is that one can say, here's an example of something, and that example is not at all representative of the something. So it's easy to deceive when you ask people to move inductively. Like, you know, all people are good. For instance, I did a really good thing yesterday, right? Well, I'm asking you to inductively infer that I'm saying this, you know, from the particular one can generalize. So yeah, you can certainly say that. I think that's not unrelated. The question of logic. All I wanted to point out there is that logical priority is not simply logical. He's not wrong either, right? But his sense of logical priority and the importance here, it doesn't really matter very much. It's like definitions come later. But the existence of, for instance, grammar as being logically prior to rhetoric, or motion as being logically prior to action, right? The same terminology adheres, and it's the same notion of logic that circulates through those things and enables him to maintain these problematic distinctions between motion and action, even as they get muddied at times. So, a definition should have just enough clauses and no more. That's entirely new critical, right? It's entirely like that economic version of aesthetics, which is that beauty is in the least necessary amounts. And this is the same, the sort of the Occam's razor thing, which never made sense to me either. Like, all things being equal, the simpler explanation is more true. Like, why? I mean, it's you know, like it is unequivocally an aesthetic preference of a particular time, which is that simplicity, the world is implicitly inclined to simplicity. But
evidence indicates otherwise.
well, I mean, it may or may not, but it's just a gigantic leap that seems like it's not a gigantic leap. It seems like common sense, and then assholes like me are like, doesn't make any sense.
Well, it's interesting in that Burke can't see, he's not aware of his own deterministic screening.
Yeah, and there's a level at which you would say, like, no one can be, right? We're all walking around, and I mean, in that epistemological, like, we're all walking around in a form of mediation through which our perceptions are mediated through the sort of concepts that we're bringing around with us. And so by definition, we can't turn and look at those things because they're what allow us to look in the first place, right? So it's not, I mean, and that's where, if I were a more generous reader, I would be capable of reading. To say that it is a quality of a new critical aesthetic is, again, for me, not to say that it's bad, but it's symptomatic of a moment. And that moment is, okay, it is to say it's bad. I have problems with it, but that's, personally idiosyncratic, I suppose. But the ease with which those types of assumptions are taken for granted in a certain style of thinking, which is, of course, poetic expression is best when it's economical. Why? I would buy the argument that, like, I like more economical poetry. Cool, right? Like, I like bumper stickers too, But I mean, the argument for a sort of evaluative superiority based on some intrinsic quality of economy, or worse, a truth claim, is likely more true because it's simple. Because you're an idiot and can't handle complexity. I mean, what are you saying here, right? Definitely, that goes on. My rant about Occam's razor. I've never had anybody, I've asked people this frequently. I've asked people to try to explain to me the basis for Occam's razor, as if it made sense. And they never do a very adequate job to me of saying, because it always comes in, well, look, the simplest thing is usually more true. Oh my God. Give me the set of cases that you've examined. And let me also say, what gets to count as simplicity is weird too, because here's a really simple explanation. God did it. That's simple, right? It's a hell of a lot more simple than evolution. So Occam's razor. Okay. Let's talk about man, because we haven't been doing that enough. I'm going to get at this essential set of clauses that we want. Okay, good. So we have a bird, right? And what's the story with the bird? We don't have the appropriate... I would like to play this scene out and see what happens. That would be more fun. What's the story with the bird?
Bird can't get out of the room.
Why not?
Because we can't tell the bird to fly a bit lower to get into the open window.
Right. So you know the story, right? So the windows go to like here, and the bird keeps flying up, and it can't get out of the room because in order to get out of the room, it would have to fly down and then out the windows. So this indicates for Burke a lack of symbolicity. There are three things about this incident. This is on page 4. One, the ability to describe this method in words would have readily made it possible for all other birds to take up this same act of, oh, this is the bird that pulls the other bird out of the nest by using leverage. Whatever, same question. The same act of genius, though they themselves might never have hit upon it. Two, the likelihood is that even this one wren never used the method again, for the ability to conceptualize implies a kind of attention without which this innovation could probably not advance beyond the condition of a mere accident or to the condition of an invention. Three, on the happier side, this is the apologetic move. I'm not saying that humans are better than animals. On the happier side, there's the thought that at least through lack of such ability, birds are spared our many susceptibilities to the ways of demagogic spellbinders. They can't be filled with fantastic hatreds for alien populations they know about mainly from hearsay or with all sorts of unsettling new expectations, right? So the upside of birds not having simplicity is that they don't learn to hate people they haven't met yet. I don't want to be too dismissive, but that's the move he's making, right? He's saying, look, I'm not just saying that we're better than them because we have to deal with not liking people we haven't met. But let's go through. So there is, what are the qualities of a symbol system that would have helped our flying bird?
It's repeatable. Transferred.
Okay, it can be transferred. A lesson that is learned once can be transferred to somebody else. So Aristotle wrote the Rhetoric, and other people could read it, right? Somewhere else, without Aristotle being present. So that's one advantage, is deterritorialization. It can go somewhere else and be repeatable by someone else. Okay? That's one advantage. That's a kind of secondary advantage. It's travel ability. Travel ability. We could have just told the bird to fly down and go out. Right? What other advantage? What allows us to realize this? What allows us, and not the bird, to realize what the bird needs to do?
You understand the concept of windows.
What's that?
You understand the concept of
Yeah,
windows.
it's these, right? Like, that there's a certain kind of, he'll say, an attentiveness or an attitude that is enabled through this symbolicity, which allows you to conceptualize something in order to solve a problem. Right? So those are the two qualities, right? Is it enables a conceptualization of any particular issue. Right? This is exactly what Nietzsche is saying, right? It enables a conceptualization of any issue, and it enables that transmission. But don't think that makes you better, because you also are. All right. Do we see any problem? I mean, that makes total sense, right? The bird is unable to conceptualize, to form a concept of the situation, because it's dealing with just immediate stimuli. So it keeps flying up and up. So it can't form a concept of the situation. And it can't tell other birds, let's say it accidentally happens to fly out the window, it can't then go tell other birds, like when you get stuck in a fucking room, right? It can't do that. Is this true? Seems true to me.
No, not necessarily at all.
Why not?
Obviously, there are other rooms and other, to extrapolate from one instance doesn't mean every instance is solved. And he's totally dismissing the possibility that the bird is panicked, and also that the bird is capable, perhaps, of reasoning its way out eventually, just hasn't yet.
Okay, it's a kind of reductive way of treating the bird in this case, right? It is taking, by example, one instance in generalizing attributes from it. Let's flip the switch, though. I mean, everything that Lauren just said is quite right and could complicate this version of the bird. Let's flip the switch. What about humans? Are we that good at those things? I'm being serious. I mean, anyone who's ever been a teacher, the idea that you simply tell somebody to fly down and go out the window and that they then do that doesn't seem to really ever apply. Or it seems like one could certainly complicate the bird version of the narrative fairly easily, but also complicate the ease with which one attributes those qualities to humans. As if the capacity to conceptualize automatically means that one does it, and one does it efficiently, and one transmits it efficiently. That those distinctions may not be as stark or as easy to maintain, even here at the beginning, as he perhaps wants it to. Yeah.
And you have another kind of person on the board there, right? Intuitive man.
Yeah. Does this apply to all people? Does it all, yes. The next page is where we talked about the separation of us from the world, that symbol systems both alienate us from the world and connect us to the world. To this extent, symbols are constitutive of reality. I mean, that's a pretty big claim, right? That's not symbols are nice ways of saying things. That is saying our perception of the world is only mediated through symbols. That's a very Nietzschean claim in that sense. And then so the logic plays itself out, and really, to me, it's the whole action-motion logic. But on page 6, when a bit of talking takes place, just what is doing the talking? Just where are the words coming from? Some of the motivations must derive from our animality, and some from our symbolicity. We hear of brainwashing, of schemes whereby an ideology is imposed upon people. But should we stop at that? Should we not also see the situation the other way around? For was not the brainwasher also similarly motivated? Do we simply use words, or do they not also use us? And this is pretty fucking heady stuff from 1966, right? I mean, this is pushing on the boundaries of integrity, and it does. It pushes on the boundaries of integrity, distinguishing the human from the idea from the word, the concept from the thing. But I think it finally doesn't. It finally settles away from that pushing. Do we simply use words? Do they not also use us? And ideology is like a god come down to earth, where it will inhabit a place pervaded by his presence. And ideology is like a spirit taking up its abode in a body. It makes the body hop around in certain ways, and that same body would have hopped around in different ways had a different ideology happened to inhabit it. So what does that say? What's not formed by ideology?
Body?
The body. Right? You have this kind of, this is exactly a very good instance of a strong version of a social constructionist logic, which is to say, well, hell, what's the old dichotomy? Body, mind. Right? Or body, spirit, right? So you've got different kinds of matter for Descartes, different types of things. There's the body kind of thing, and there's the mind kind of thing, and they're different kinds of things. Well, this is no longer buying that dumbass version of mind, because that's a totally theological concept. So instead what it's going to do is say, it's not mind anymore, it is cultural symbol systems. But it's still fully premised on the very same distinction as the Cartesian dualism is. It just fills the dualism differently. Instead of body, one has culture, or discourse, or symbol systems. It doesn't matter what, I mean, it does actually matter what your terminology is, but not for these purposes. One still has this idea that there is, you would also hear this is an example of where you need exorcism, right? So it's like ideology sort of fills the body up, and like that there is some sort of, but that there's some sort of material body there prior to or separate from its ideological instantiation. You will hear the terminology, not so much the terminology of ideology makes a body hop around, but like writing on the body is a very common, like last 20 years people talk about different ways of writing on the body, that the body is this material substrate that culture writes in particular ways, that culture gives meaning to. So the vagina doesn't in and of itself mean anything. It is a material phenomenon, but it's written on to produce a notion of maternity, for instance. So the things, the cultural things that follow, there is a bodily thing on which those culture things inscribe. Does that make sense? If I took the phrase "that makes sense" out of my pedagogy, would I have anything else to say? So it's no longer a mind-body dichotomy, it is a culture-body dichotomy. That one, or, fuck it, let's go right to it, right? Right, motion action. I mean, that's the baseline here. And again, I want you to firmly keep in mind that the motive, to use his terminology, behind doing such a thing is good, right? It is not Burke's a dumbass and doesn't recognize the problematic ways in which this Constitution still enables various atrocities. It's like, no, the idea is to say there's something special about this precisely in order to make it less easy to kill it or do violence to it. I mean, it's that the impulse behind this very separation and this very dichotomy is laudable. So there. But I just want to insist upon that because it's like, it's also really problematic. So okay, symbol using animal. That's one. What's two? Inventor of the negative. This is, okay, so we covered the symbol using animal. So my version of this is that man is the creature who insistently and repeatedly wants to define himself as the symbol using animal. In other words, like, there's clearly some anxiety here, but there's nothing really special about it. Like the same way that my dog's like sniffing pee at every corner. It's like, we are a simple using animal, we are a simple using animal. Okay, the second clause is inventor of the negative. The famous phrase being, there are no negatives in nature. There are no negatives in nature where everything simply is what it is and as it is. To look for negatives in nature would be as absurd as though you were going to hunt for the square root of -1. The negative is a function peculiar to symbol systems. The quickest way to demonstrate the sheer simplicity of the negative is to look at any object, say a table, and to remind yourself that though it is exactly what it is, you could go on for the rest of your life saying all the things that it is not. So here you've got such differences. But not without positive terms. Where are the positive terms? Well, they're not really positive terms.
Yeah. You mean like the should?
Not yet. Out in nature, things are what they are. Right? In symbol systems, things are what they are not. So it is precisely as an entry into symbol systems. Again, we have, on this side of the coin, we have being and presence. On this side of the coin, we have lack and dynamism, movement, non-self-presence. This is what Biesecker will say that Lentrichia finds very interesting about Burke, is that Burke, the location of non-self-presence, what she doesn't recognize is that non-self-presence is premised on a presence, the Ding an sich, the nature that just is what it is. But let me ask this, are there no negatives in nature? I mean, here's an example. Does a thermometer read 54? I can ask, does the thermometer read 54? And if it registers anything in the world but 54, your proper answer can be, it's not 54. Yet there is no such thing as it simply not being 54. It is 53 or 55 or whatever. I think there are a lot of things that are not 54 without, like that's imaginable to me. Are there numbers in nature?
No.
Tons of numbers.
What's that?
I think there are tons of numbers in nature.
I don't know. I mean, I'm asking.
There's the whole concept of what is it called, phi or whatever, like the pine cones that spiral the exact same way, and like the mathematical proportions of everything.
Fibonacci sequence, yeah.
Yeah, and everything like that.
Okay. The question would be: are those qualities of nature, or are those qualities of the symbol systems through which we attempt to understand nature? Because he's clearly siding with the second point, to say, because I think that like there are no negatives in nature is the same as saying there are no. I mean, it's structurally the same thing as saying there are no numbers in nature. But can one use the negative and numbers in order to understand it? Sure, but those are not of nature. Those are of symbol systems.
So he also says that the negative begins not as a resource to measure, but as a command, as don't.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the negative begins.
Thou shalt not.
Right.
That's not in nature. My dog never barks at anybody walking by the front yard. He's saying,
Right.
Thou shalt not.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, even in the question of the negative, I mean, I can understand saying, like, look, symbol systems are constituted by negation. But to then distinguish that from the natural, material, biological, as if that's not, as if those things simply are and are self-present, that again is to me the problematic move. That is attempting to explain the distinctiveness of symbol systems and therefore of the human. And so in each case, it's like, well, there may be no negatives in nature, but there are negatives that are part of symbol systems. And by the way, I mean, there is even the baseline problem. This is the obvious one. The obvious move is to say, like, how is it that we're not part of nature somehow? How is it that symbol systems, as the capacity to reflect upon nature, somehow get out of being nature? Wouldn't that be a problem? So that you would say, well, if there are negatives in symbol systems, then there are negatives in nature. Because symbol systems are inextricably in nature. And one needs, and this is where I would say is the crucial part, one needs an implicit theory of hierarchy to not think that. Which is why he can't simply say, this is different than the other thing. That there's an implicit theory of hierarchy in that move. Does that make sense? Even though it's not explicit, and he constantly wants to say, I am not making humans better than, I'm just saying they're different from. I'm saying you implicitly are forging a hierarchy. You have to be. Thou shalt not. But there's a still useful, like all language is negative, in a sense. Using words at all is, we know they are not the things they stand in for, etc., etc. Okay, separated from his natural condition by instruments of his own making. Again, the natural. Nature, culture. This diagram makes total sense. It's not messy. It's like a football play. What is this? What is this phrase of the aria? I still love you, New York. Separated from his natural conditions by instruments of his own making.
It was like his version of tool using, tool making. He wants to phrase it differently, but
Right.
it's basically.
Techne. So this is the extent to which we have, always be suspicious of these moments. Even the most primitive of tribes are led by inventions to depart somewhat from the needs of food, shelter, sex as defined by the survival standards of sheer animality. This notion of a survival standard of sheer animality is the thing that I would want to problematize. What is that? What is that? What is the survival standard of sheer animality?
Well, that you say that he values simplicity or like the ideal.
Yeah, give me some. He's valuing simplicity. I thought you were going to give me some simplicity. Shit, give me some simplicity. But what is it? I mean, I understand you say like food and shelter so you don't die. What does that actually mean? I mean, really, like I'm not being a smartass. I'm saying, what does that actually mean? Like if I'm sufficiently bedridden that I can be kept alive by giving me an intravenous drip, is that sufficient?
It's probably like the amount of food that you need to eat the food that you're going to eat. Like the amount of energy it takes.
Energy it takes to consume the food that you consume. So
a little bit more than that.
So
How much
sheer
food do you keep
animality
eating?
is, in like the Agamben bear life sense, it is the lowest minimum threshold of life to which life still adheres. I would argue that that's probably not what he's talking about. Right? It seems to me that this notion of sheer animality actually has a quite implicit qualitative sense, which is one's capacity to do all that one can do. And be all that one can be. It's totally about joining the army.
So sheer animality is some sort of being of a state to exercise one's potential, if we're going to use that
Yeah,
word?
something like that. Something like that. But again, I mean, I don't know because it doesn't, but all I'm saying is be suspicious when people talk about the demands of sheer animality. It's one of those common sense phrases that you think you understand what they're talking about, but they usually don't, nor do you. And so what they're really doing is they're implicitly installing this kind of dichotomy and not being held accountable for it. So hold them accountable. What do you mean? Ask them that. And then they'll be like, I know, you know what I mean. And you will answer, yes I do, because it's easier than having a John conversation. We need to know that some things are better than others. I think that one's right. I think that's the first phrase where I don't have a problem with that. That seems like what humans do.
But a lot of animals are hierarchical.
Oh yeah. Other animals, yeah. I mean, in fact, lots of
Yeah.
animals are hierarchical. So it may not be a distinguishing feature of the human, but it is a characteristic.
That's not a definition.
Well, no, I'm not. But that was the first one where I'm like, yeah, humans are goaded by the spirit of hierarchy. I sort of agree with that. Nietzsche's argument
basically
is
saying our survival technique perpetuates the weak.
right.
Animal survival technique perpetuates the strong.
Right. This is exactly what Nietzsche hates about Darwin, is that Darwinian evolutionary theory is a theory of the survival of the lamest, the many, and not of the exceptional one or two. The exceptional one or two are the ones that died, like the caveman. That caveman was exceptional and died. It's like, well, that's what sucks about this version of evolution, is that it's designed for mass mediocrity, not for spectacular individuality.
But I don't think animal hierarchies are designed to protect the best. They're designed to protect the herd. They're designed to protect the most.
That's-
exactly, yeah, mediocrity.
That's the Darwinian argument, is yeah, you know, that the constitution of hierarchy is the way in which the herd, the most, survive. So that's exactly Nietzsche's issue with that, is like, that's the survival of the mediocre. The survival of the fittest is the survival of the most mediocre, and it's the death of the exception. You know, that's what sucks about evolution, so we got to invent a new version of evolution for Nietzsche, you know. Well, I mean, frankly, I mean, he just says, like, I mean, Darwin's version of evolution is a herd moralism. That's his claim, you know. Okay, last but not least, because this is very interesting to me. What is it? This is Spirit of Hierarchy, moved by sense of order, and rotten with perfection. The principle of perfection central to the nature of language is motive. The mere desire to name something by its proper name, or to speak a language in a distinctive way, is intrinsically perfectionist. Really? What is more perfectionist in essence than the impulse, when one is in dire need of something, to state this need that one in effect defines the situation? I don't really understand that. There's a line here I didn't understand. There's a couple. Did you guys get the paragraph on Levi-Strauss about nature and culture being on the wrong side of symbolism in the action motion? I had no idea. Like, I talked with several of my friends, like, please explain to me what this says, because it makes no sense. I think there's a lot of Burke. It's just like, he was really drunk and didn't have an editor. You know, like, and that's what makes it fun to read. Like, which is totally. But I don't think that this is right. This is very different from Nietzsche, right? Because Nietzsche's version is precisely not the perfectionist quality of the language. It is the dissimulating quality of the language. It is the not I'm getting it fully right. It is I don't give a shit about how right I'm getting it at all, right? Or I'm trying to get it functionally decent. So the Aristotelian concept of entelechy, that each being aims at the perfection natural to its kind. There is a principle of perfection implicit in the nature of the symbol system, and in keeping with this nature, a symbol-using animal, man is moved by this principle. What is this principle? Take it to, this is the Eagles, take it to the limit. It is always trying to fulfill the purpose of whatever that purpose may be. That there's a sort of implicit nature, and we're always trying to fulfill it as much as possible. This is where I was like, can't I just be lazy sometimes? Or do I have to be like really lazy?
Laziest lazy.
There's no half-assed laziness, like perfect yourself. So I don't quite know what perfectibility means, although I am interested in the idea of like taking something to the limit of what it can do as being a constitutive element. That seems, you know, what is this attribute capable of? I get an opposable thumb. What can I do with this? Bowling ball, you know, like, or whatever. Whatever sort of things that don't seem really, like, what else can be done with these attributes that I have as a quality of humanity, right? And obviously bowling being high on that spirit of hierarchy. You know, and this is not, it's not far from a Spinozist orientation of taking things to the limit of what they're capable of. And if this were surrounded by a kind of experimental ethos, that what constitutes the human in this case is that. What concerns me about his version of perfectibility in the Aristotelian version is that I think we have an actual picture of it on 21. And it's a picture that he doesn't like and doesn't approve of, but this is the picture of perfectibility. There is the chance that the problem in its very insolubility also contains enough elements of self-cancellation to keep things from coming to a perfect fulfillment in a perfect apocalyptic holocaust. That's perfection. And that's what frightens him, right? Is precisely that, like, now that's a particularly, I don't know, scary version of perfection, or, I mean, That's completion, absolute completion of everything, or at least everything human. Because, frankly, that's what really matters. I don't know. I can see how that could be understood as perfection. There's nowhere to go from there. There's nowhere symbolicity goes from absolute human annihilation. That's perfection, meaning there's nothing else to be done. That's the end of the road. And the social version of ossification is Holocaust. The end of all things, of all symbolicity. But what I'm sort of saying, what I'm implicitly saying is like, this follows. This is not an idiosyncrasy of Burke, that it follows from the dichotomies that he's setting up. That perfectibility, right, ends with the end of all of this. And it doesn't mean, he's not saying it's perfect, like it's good. He's not. He's saying it's really, really bad. But it is the end game. It is the fulfillment of the human. It's to destroy humanity and symbolicity. Right? So it's really, really bad. So it's not, Well, I mean, we'll return to this. Let me try to think of some. Oh yeah, there are a couple things that we'll get to that are really explicitly attempting to problematize this dichotomy. Let me say, it's impossible to get outside of. So it's pretty easy for me to like slam Burke for his inability to do this. I think the reason I'm slamming Burke is precisely that he should be smart enough to see it because he bumps up against it at a series of different moments, and then he refuses to acknowledge it at those moments. So that's, I think, maybe the source of my frustration of seeing it in Burke, and adamantly clings to the distinction. But that distinction is powerful and everywhere. And there's no simple getting outside of it. How one inhabits those things differently is a problematic that you have to invent. There isn't an answer, unfortunately. So yeah, go read some more Burke. Any other Burkean, Burking up the wrong tree? Did I frame the whole discussion negatively with that title of the essays? I will have the readings for next time up by tonight. I hope. No, I won't have it all up by tonight.
So we more of a modern. Going down this.
Quick speakeasy trip tonight.